Are you an avid gamer? Or maybe you just play casually? What about if you've never touched a controller before? Well, don't fret. All are welcome here at the Double XP podcast hosted by the Triforce Projekt.
Hello, and welcome back to the Double XP podcast, the talk show where we discuss all things related to games and more. I'm your host, the Triforce Projekt, and today, taking a quick look at The Legend of Zelda, we are going to just kind of scratch the surface just to allow you to have a good knowledge of the game, but you can go and learn more if you'd like on your own. So we will start out by talking about the games in the main series. We'll talk about some of the other remakes and just a little bit of the history of the game and the other medias that it is a part of, and then we will talk about some interesting facts of the game and a little bit of the lore and mythology of it. And like I said, we'll leave plenty of information for you to go and find on your own and learn more on. So let's get started. So we're going to be kind of going over the games in the main series, little tips, or not tips, but tidbits about the games and about the series, look at some mythology and some lore on it, and just kind of go over some of the basics of the series as a whole, and maybe see if you guys are interested in a deep dive later on where we do real in-depth information on the game. But without further ado, let's get started with the concept of the game. So, The Legend of Zelda is an action-adventure game, or a game franchise created by the Japanese game designers, and I apologize when I mispronounce these, not if, Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka. It is primarily developed and published by Nintendo, although some portable installments and re-releases have been outsourced to Flagship, Vanpool, and Grezzo. The gameplay incorporates action-adventure and elements of action RPG games. The series centers around the various incarnations of Link, a courageous young man of the elf-like Hylian race, and Princess Zelda, a magical princess who is the mortal reincarnation of the goddess Hylia. I can't speak today, I'm sorry. As they fight to save the magical land of Hyrule from Ganon, an evil warlord turned demon king, who is the principal antagonist of the series. Ganon wishes to use the Triforce, a sacred relic left behind by the three goddesses that created Hyrule, to make the world in his own dark image. When gathered together, the power of the Triforce can grant any wish to its user desires. However, someone with a heart that does not possess a balance of the three virtues of power, courage, and wisdom attempts to touch the Triforce. It splits into three triangles and bond with three people whose hearts embody the required virtue. Although their personalities and backstories differ from game to game, the incarnations of Link and Zelda often have many traits in common, such as Link often being left-handed and clad in green, and Zelda being associated with wisdom, light, and prophecy. While the conflict with Ganon serves as a backbone of the series, some games have featured other settings and antagonists, basically other enemies and bosses and main baddies, with Link traveling or being sent to these other lands in their time of need. So yeah, not all the games take place in Hyrule. Some of them take place elsewhere, and we can cover that a little bit later or in the deep dive if need be. Since the original Legend of Zelda release in 1986, the series has expanded to include 19 entries on all of Nintendo's major game consoles, as well as a number of spin-offs. An American animated TV series based on the games aired in 1989, and an individual manga adaptations commissioned by Nintendo have been produced in Japan since 1997. I believe those are still being produced today. The Legend of Zelda is one of Nintendo's most successful franchises, right behind Mario and I don't actually know if it's behind anything else other than Mario. Maybe. Several of its entries are considered among the greatest video games of all time. And what better way to get started than with the list of games? And we'll start out with games in the main series. We won't list off all of them because there is like 30, 40 some games total, and there's 30 or 20 or so in the list of main series games anyways. So, and they date all the way back to 1986 was the first release of the Legend of Zelda. It came out in 86 in Japan on the Famicom or the NES, and then in 87 in North America. And then Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, came out the following year, 87 and 88 respectively for Japan and North America. Then the third entry in the main series was The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which came out in 91 and 92 for Japan and North America, and that was the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or the SNES, and then that also released on the Game Boy in 2002. Fourth entry in the game series was The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, which released in Japan in 1993 and North America in 93 as well, which marks the first game in the series that released in the same year, both in Japan and in North America markets. And then it was released on the Game Boy Color in 1998. The fifth game in the series is A Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, and that was released in Japan and North America both in 1998 for the Nintendo 64. This was the first 3D Legend of Zelda game that was released. Then following that was Legend of Zelda: Majora's Mask, which came out 2 years later in 2000 on the Nintendo 64. And then following that, we had The Legend of Zelda: Oracle of Seasons, which released in 2001 on the Game Boy Color, and Oracle of Ages, which both released in 2001 as well. These were games that were released, I believe, in tandem with one another. They were the same, had the same release day, to my knowledge, if I remember correctly. The next game in the series, which would have been the 8th game released in the main series of games, is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and Four Swords. So those got released together in 2002 in North America, and then 2003 actually in Japan, and that was on the Game Boy Advance. Following that was The Legend of Zelda: Wind Waker, which came out in 2002 in Japan and 2003 in North America for the GameCube. And Wind Waker took a large change in its graphical look and art style that definitely some fans were not happy with. It got a decent amount of criticism for its choices on art style when it released at the time. After Wind Waker came the Legend of Zelda: Four Swords Adventures for the Nintendo GameCube in 2004. Then Legend of Zelda Minish Cap came out the same year for the Game Boy Advance. The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess came out for the GameCube in 2006, which was a little more grown-up version of Link. Had a little more, not like adult themes, but it was definitely geared more towards adults, went to a less cartoonish art style. After that came The Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass, which was released the following year on the Nintendo DS. After the Phantom Hourglass, we got The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, which came out 2 years later in 2009 on the DS as well. Then after Spirit Tracks was The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, which was released in 2011 on the Wii, the first release for the Nintendo Wii. That also introduced the first Legend of Zelda game that had motion controls, to my knowledge. I did not have a Nintendo DS, so I didn't get to play a lot of those games as a kid growing up, so I'm not sure if there was any sort of motion control with those. But I know that Skyward Sword had motion control with the Wiimotes. Then in 2013, Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds was released for the 3DS. That came obviously a couple years after Skyward Sword. 2015 was the release of Legend of Zelda Triforce Heroes, which also came out on the 3DS. I believe Triforce Heroes might have had multiplayer in it. I know the ones we mentioned previously, Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages on the Game Boy Color, you could link up and play with people, if I remember correctly. And then after Triforce Heroes, we got The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which just came out in 2017 on the Nintendo Switch. The first release for the Nintendo Switch in the franchise, which many people called the Nintendo Switch a Zelda machine for a good while when it first released. And then now, just this year, we were given Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, released 2023 for the Nintendo Switch, the follow-up game to Breath of the Wild. So that is a rundown of the main games, or the games in the main series, and there is plenty more that you can do for a little breaking those down into different storylines. And there's the whole timeline is very, very confusing and can be very very hard to follow. But there's basically a few different timelines that you can kind of play through if you want a certain set of game, or not set of games, but that you can follow the Fallen Hero timeline, the Child timeline, and the Adult timeline. So they all take place in different eras of Link, the main character's lifespan, and different eras overall, because you get into some of these games with how many games have come out. I mean, this series has been around since 1986. It is now 2023. It will be 40 years old in 3 years. So, with 40 years of games, it will be very hard to keep storylines to coincide with each other and just things like that. But there are different ages that links can be around to an extent, I guess. It's very confusing. And we could do an even deeper dive. Maybe we'll do that sometime in the future here. But we will maybe have to do that where we go fully into the whole story and explain what happens and how these storylines work and how you can coincide and play them all together. That would be a super long episode, and it would take a lot of work to kind of research and figure out. But if that's something we're interested in, we can definitely do that. But kind of pivoting from just the main series of games, there's 9 remake games that have come out, which vary on tons of different versions. There's a Link's Awakening remake that came out for the Nintendo Switch, I believe in 2021, 2022, something like that. And then they have one collector's edition that came with a special GameCube release, but it contains The Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and the Wind Waker demo. And it was a promotional disc. They didn't sell it. It was very hard to get, but it was a very cool thing because that was the only way you could go back and play games back in those times, really, unless you had a actual working NES or something like that for those, and a copy of the game. I mean, emulators did exist, but at least for me, it was much harder to access them, and I did not understand how to use them. But other than the 9 remakes and the collector's edition, there's also 17 spin-off games in the series that vary from many different styles of games and gameplay that aren't traditional RPG-esque games. There are 5 written books on the series, or on the world and the lore, and those are like novels, because there's plenty of like referendum books and things like that. There's a 13 episode TV series for children or for kids, and then there's 2 board games that have come out in the Legend of Zelda world, or kind of brand, I guess. So those are just a few of the other medias and parts of what the Legend of Zelda kind of has to offer. Now we're going to go and cover just a few interesting tidbits or facts about the franchise that I found while I was kind of doing this little bit of research. First one that I found here is that the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, so the first game that came out for Switch in the Legend of Zelda series, has an 8-bit prototype. Which I thought this was just so crazy when I first read this. It kind of blew my mind. But it was first designed as an 8-bit game in the same exact graphical style as the original Legend of Zelda, which that version obviously wasn't for the public to use or to but to play. But it was to work out the features, and it was a kind of a proof of concept for the studio team to basically. But the 8-bit version was eventually brought to light, and that basically became what we now get to play on our Nintendo Switches right now to this day. Now going from one of the newest games to one of the oldest games, a little fact about the original Legend of Zelda and its sequel, actually, those were one of the only NES games to get the gold cartridge, which I don't know if any of you have had an NES and had the different giant cartridges, but some of them were gold. I think they had a few other colors. The gold is really what stuck in my mind because it was shiny, where all the other ones were a matte color. So if you had a gold cased game, it really, really stuck out. But The Legend of Zelda and its sequel were unique in the sense that they had the gold packaging. There was a few other NES games that were packaged in the gold cartridges. There was Nintendo World Championship 1990 cartridge that was a gold package, and it sold for like $25,000. But yeah, there's not many other games that got the gold packaging. The funny thing, actually, about The Legend of Zelda is that the Legend of Zelda gold cartridge is actually more common than the gray cartridge for the Legend of Zelda. So that's kind of funny. If you had a gray Legend of Zelda cartridge, it was worth more than the gold, but it was still cool to see them gold. The next little piece of information or a little funny tidbit is Link, the main character that you play as. His look was inspired by Peter Pan, which I feel like is a pretty kind of obvious thing once you hear that with the green and the like outfit look. It is very Peter Pan-esque, without being directly Peter Pan, obviously. In the timeline of the games, The Legend of Zelda actually takes place near the end of the timeline. Uh, but there's been decades of Zelda games, so that they've kind of gotten the timeline quite flushed out, and or at least explained to an extent, maybe not fully flushed out. But it has one major split during or in the game Ocarina of Time, and then the first game actually takes place well after the events of Ocarina of Time, in a scenario where Link is defeated by Ganon. Spoiler alert. Not really, but... and then it's after the era of Light and Dark, which consists of the following games: Links to a Past, Link's Awakening, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, A Link Between Worlds, Triforce Heroes, and Triforce Heroes. And it takes place after the Golden Era and the era of the Decline. And then after that is where The Legend of Zelda and the Link's Adventure follows there. So that's kind of the first game in the series was actually basically the end of the series. It's kind of a crazy thought, or crazy not crazy, because you see that a ton with movies, series. Well, okay, maybe not a ton. I might have overplayed that a little bit. But yeah, you do see that in some sort of media. But I was mentioning earlier with the Twilight Princess how it was the first game with motion controls. It was actually mirrored on the Wii version, so the whole game was mirrored to be flipped the other way. So yeah, when it launched on the Wii, it came with some changes that made it different from the GameCube version. One of those changes was the motion controls, but the whole Wii version was mirrored entirely. And these changes most likely went hand in hand with the developer, or the developers thought they should go together at least. As when they mirrored it, it changed Link's dominant hand from left to right. And they did this intentionally because they wanted to make sure that the game was suited for right-handed people using the motion controls. Which they assumed, or not assumed, but recognized would be most of their players. It was not up until this point that we had seen Link as a right-handed user. He had always been left-handed, wielding his sword in the game up until this point. So 25 years into creating the games, they then changed it due to this small little feature. Kind of a weird little tidbit to know. But they did switch it back. Twilight Princess HD that came out on the Wii U returned it to the original perspective. So it was only for that small little period that he was right-handed on the Wii in particular. Just kind of a weird little thing they decided to put in, make it a little bit more understandable for most of the players trying to use the motion controls. Next little tidbit I found was a little information on the development of the Triforce and that whole process of it. And the first Legend of Zelda game, actually, the Triforce didn't include 3 full pieces. It only included the Triforce of Power, which was yielded by Ganon, and the Triforce of Wisdom, which Princess Zelda had hidden, which is what Link was looking for the whole time. But shortly after that was at least in the beginning. It didn't take long for them, though, to add in the Triforce of Courage, which was added to the game's lore to complete the full 3-piece Triforce that we have known to, or come to know for the game now. Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, revolves around finding the Triforce of Courage. So they made basically a whole game about finding this final piece to the Triforce. But since then, the symbol has appeared in all the Zelda games, but it's not always significant to the game story. So they're not always needed in the game or in the game story, depending on what's going on and what it is. But it has always been in the game now since the second one, and it is a part of the lore. They made it. They really wrote it in. But that's one of those little things that, like, if you really paid attention when you first played the first one, you do know that the Triforce only had 2 pieces originally. And then I think we're gonna finish up here, or we're gonna close out with just a little bit of mythology about the game, and we'll do maybe just a little overview of everything. So let's just let's finish this up here, and we'll just close out with a little touch of mythology from the world of Hyrule. But just like the Triforce, the mythology of Hyrule has evolved over the years. The goddess's role in shaping Hyrule and the creation of the Triforce wasn't introduced in the series until A Link to the Past. Before then, the 2 games contained subtle allusions to the real world religion of Christianity. The references to the Christian religion are subtle, contained largely to the cross symbol that appears in the first Legend of Zelda game and Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. While A Link to the Past does introduce the lore of the goddesses and Hyrule's invented religion, that game also has a few holdover Christian references too. So I just thought this was kind of an interesting thing. I never thought of The Legend of Zelda as even a slightly religious game, and I don't think it ever was really. But there's been, while doing some research, there's definitely been some notes and some things that I've found and some links that I've seen people connect, tying it kind of to that early on more so. And a little bit for some of the later games too. It's just a very, very interesting thought that I've had looking at it now, trying to compare it like that. So, and that is how we are going to wrap up the episode, guys. So I hope you all enjoy it. Let us know down below wherever you're watching this. I know we will have Spotify will have some sort of question or poll or some sort of comment system, I believe. And if you're watching this on the YouTube video, let us know in the comments there. If you want to see a deep dive or if you want more info on this game or what the next game is that you want to see for our next Games at a Glance. Thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope we earned your viewership, subscription, whatever it's called, wherever you're viewing and enjoying. And we hope to see you at the next one. Talk to you later.